On 3:40 March 17, 1943, North Atlantic, a merchant convoy moves through waters where multiple ships have already been lost to U-boat attacks. Escort reports show an incoming strike that should guarantee another hit, yet the torpedo passes harmlessly through the formation. Officers search for the cause, but the only change in routine traces back to a minor adjustment made by the ship's cook. His action violates protocol, appears insignificant, and is never logged. The simplicity of it suggests a flaw in everything the enemy expects. Stories shaped by moments like this deserve clarity and preservation. Stay with Battlefront Insider. Hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated. The Atlantic supply system depended on merchant convoys moving in steady formations while U-boat groups searched for predictable gaps. Each escorted run carried material that determined whether distant fronts advanced or stalled, and every disruption forced command to recalculate allocations. Losses mounted at a rate that strained shipyards and pushed crews into repeated cycles of deployment with little rest. Leadership published instructions outlining standardized maneuvers and communication patterns, assuming consistency would limit confusion during sudden attacks. In practice, this consistency created familiar sequences that enemy submarines learned to anticipate with increasing accuracy. A rigid hierarchy shaped every decision aboard the merchant vessels. Captains followed procedures issued from naval authorities, officers enforced routine checks, and enlisted crew carried out assigned tasks without deviation. Within this system, the ship's cook occupied a low-impact position. He handled preparation schedules, supply tracking, and support duties. His role required attention to recurring patterns of movement, timing, and crew coordination, but it held no authority to influence tactical discussions. He observed operations from a distance, watching how decisions filtered through ranks and how actions repeated with little variation across voyages. As convoy losses increased, officers debated adjustments to known defensive patterns, yet proposed changes moved slowly through administrative channels. Many believed the existing structure would eventually stabilize results if crews simply followed the established guidelines more precisely. This confidence persisted even as the gap widened between official expectations and the outcomes at sea. Submarine crews adapted quickly, exploiting moments shaped by repetition, while the convoy system struggled to respond with equal speed. Through his daily routines, the cook noted how identical sequences unfolded during each convoy, the same preparatory drills, the same internal timings, and the same alignment of tasks that signaled predictable stages of the journey. He tracked these patterns without intending to challenge them, but each new report of a lost ship made the repetitions feel more consequential. He recognized how minor operational habits, considered irrelevant by command, could offer enemy submarines clues about convoy movement. His observations carried no platform for discussion, yet the consistency of losses made the implications difficult for him to ignore. Unease settled into his thoughts as he realized that a small, overlooked detail embedded in routine procedure might be enabling U-boat commanders to anticipate key moments of vulnerability. The pattern remained invisible to the officers responsible for analyzing reports, but increasingly clear to him through repetition. This recognition formed the first break in his passive role and hinted at a discrepancy no one else had identified. Convoy doctrine relied on zigzag patterns meant to disrupt submarine calculations, but repetition turned these maneuvers into sequences that enemy crews anticipated with increasing success. U-boat commanders logged these recurring patterns and adjusted firing solutions accordingly. Uniform radio protocols, intended to reduce confusion, produced communication rhythms that further revealed predictable moments in each convoy's movement. These elements created a structure that initially seemed protective but gradually shaped a framework that submarines learned to exploit. Within naval command, arguments emerged over the pace and direction of tactical changes. Some officers pushed for broader experimentation, while others insisted that familiar methods remained the safest option. Reports detailing the failures of standard patterns circulated slowly, often reaching decision-makers long after the information lost its relevance. As discussions stalled, convoys continued to endure losses at levels that undermined strategic objectives. The delay between frontline experience and institutional response created a widening gap that no single adjustment could close quickly. Merchant sailors confronted the growing pattern of attacks with resignation. Many believed the convoy system, despite its weaknesses, offered the only viable protection available. They accepted that some ships would be lost on every major run, shaping an atmosphere where survival felt dependent on chance instead of planning. This mindset developed from repeated exposure to outcomes that contradicted official assurances. The routine of preparing for each voyage became a ritual shaped by expectation of damage rather than optimism for improvement. The enemy's increasing proficiency amplified this sense of futility. U-boats coordinated attacks with refined timing, predicting when convoys would transition between maneuver phases. Their success rates rose in tandem with Allied dependence on unchanged procedures. Supply officers worked to replace lost ships, but the rate of production could not match the pace of attrition. This imbalance strained both naval logistics and civilian infrastructure, increasing pressure to maintain convoys without meaningful strategic evolution. Throughout these voyages, the cook observed operations from a perspective shaped by routine involvement rather than tactical duty. His responsibilities placed him at consistent intervals across daily ship cycles, giving him a clear view of repeated actions and the order in which they occurred. He noticed details overlooked by those focused on navigation or defense. These included recurring habits among the crew, timing of tasks, and internal signals that aligned with official procedures but inadvertently exposed patterns to anyone tracking the ship from a distance. As the situation deteriorated, the combined stagnation of innovation and rising U-boat efficiency created a feeling that losses were unavoidable. Attempts to modify procedures lagged behind enemy adaptation. Merchant crews, escorts, and command staff all recognized the mismatch between strategy and results, but systemic momentum prevented rapid change. The convoy system moved forward under the weight of its own assumptions, unable to adjust quickly enough to break free from established routines. Amid this mounting frustration, the cook identified a vulnerability embedded not in equipment or navigation, but in how U-boats interpreted certain predictable movements. It was a flaw created by human assumptions rather than technical design, and it carried implications no one else had considered. Losses accumulated across the convoy system as sister ships fell victim to patterns the enemy already understood. Crews watched vessels that once sailed beside them disappear from formation, replaced by hastily reassigned replacements that often suffered the same fate. Each incident reinforced the reality that structural rigidity outweighed tactical creativity. Ship logs recorded these outcomes as unavoidable, yet the pattern showed a level of predictability that should have prompted investigation. Instead, each sinking became another entry in a growing list of preventable failures. Merchant sailors felt the psychological burden of these repeated losses. They prepared for voyages knowing the structure guiding their movements rarely changed, even as the enemy improved its ability to exploit it. Routine tasks became markers of approaching danger rather than anchors of stability. The familiar order of operations no longer offered reassurance. It signaled the return of a cycle that ended the same way for too many crews. With every new sailing order, the weight of past casualties lingered as a reminder of what the next convoy might endure. Institutional reluctance to accept input from lower-ranked crew deepened the sense of injustice. Reports from survivors often included observations about patterns that submarines anticipated, but such insights rarely reached decision-makers. Leadership focused on strategic frameworks rather than the lived experiences of those targeted repeatedly by the same shortcomings. The hierarchy placed distance between those constructing plans and those absorbing the consequences. This gap grew wider with each convoy that suffered losses without meaningful changes to procedure. Families felt the impact as providers failed to return from voyages assumed to be routine. Letters notifying next of kin documented a scale of loss that exceeded what many communities could absorb. Dependents faced sudden financial hardship, and maritime agencies struggled to offer timely support. The cumulative effect exposed how preventable outcomes reverberated far beyond the ocean. Every ship lost carried consequences measured not only in tonnage but in lives permanently altered. The repeated pattern of failed adaptation eroded trust between crews and naval leadership. Merchant sailors questioned the value placed on their safety when identical vulnerabilities persisted. Confidence in official strategies weakened as crews realized the enemy no longer needed to decipher new tactics because the same errors reappeared. The sense of injustice sharpened as sailors recognized their reliance on procedures that did not reflect the reality of the battlefield. For the cook, these losses carried personal weight. Crew members he had served alongside on previous voyages disappeared aboard ships struck during predictable phases of convoy movement. He followed casualty lists, recognizing names that connected directly to earlier discussions and shared duties. Their absence shaped his understanding of the cost of inaction. The knowledge that these outcomes stemmed from structural rigidity rather than unavoidable fate hardened his resolve. He experienced each loss not only as a distant statistic but as a direct consequence of a system unwilling to adjust. Successive convoy assignments repeated the same cycle. Crews boarded with the same instructions, executed the same procedures and faced the same outcomes. Expectation of improvement faded with each journey. The sense of dread intensified as sailors understood how little separated their ship from the next loss. Familiarity with the system became a source of apprehension rather than confidence. They recognized that survival depended more on luck than structural competence. Meanwhile, command centers far from the sea processed losses through administrative assessments detached from frontline experience. Decisions were made based on abstract data rather than the lived reality of the crews. These assessments rarely accounted for subtle operational habits that shaped predictable behavior. As a result, recommendations filtered down slowly, failing to keep pace with enemy adaptation. The distance between leadership and frontline operations widened, leaving crews to endure a system unable to evolve fast enough to protect them. The cook reached a breaking point when he connected a specific loss to a behavioral detail he had recognized repeatedly. The realization that such a minor, persistent pattern could contribute to a ship's destruction made inaction untenable. The weight of that knowledge intensified the sense of responsibility pressing on him. He understood that continuing to rely on the existing system would guarantee further casualties that could be avoided if someone intervened. A single thought rose above his frustration. Stories built on preventable loss deserve attention so their lessons are not overlooked by those who need them most. This recognition formed the quiet force behind. The cook understood that he held an insight capable of altering convoy survivability. His position did not grant authority to propose changes, yet the consistency of the pattern he had observed left little doubt about its significance. He recognized that U-boats anticipated specific actions repeated by merchant crew with near-perfect reliability. This insight carried the potential to disrupt enemy calculations, but only if acted upon with precision and conviction. The challenge lay in determining whether he had the right to intervene despite his rank. The risks of acting without approval were substantial. Any deviation from established procedure could destabilize command structure, especially during periods of heightened threat. An unauthorized action, even one rooted in sound reasoning, could create confusion at critical moments. Officers depended on predictable routines to maintain cohesion under pressure. A single unexpected change from a lower-ranked crew member risked generating misinterpretation, potentially compromising the ship and the convoy. The cook understood that responsibility without authority placed him in a precarious position. If the idea failed, the consequences would be severe. The ship could be lost and with it every person on board. Investigations would seek a cause, and evidence of unauthorized action would place blame squarely on him. Disciplinary measures could follow if he survived, marking him as someone who had disrupted order rather than protected lives. The weight of potential repercussions formed a barrier difficult to cross. The cook measured these possibilities carefully, recognizing that one misjudgment could cost far more than his reputation. Internal debate consumed him as he considered whether adhering to protocol outweighed the responsibility to prevent further preventable deaths. He reviewed each loss he had witnessed and the recurring details that tied them together. The knowledge that inaction equated to acceptance deepened his conflict. The system provided no channel for someone in his position to present tactical insights, reinforcing his sense of isolation. He stood between loyalty to procedure and loyalty to the lives affected by its shortcomings. Cultural norms aboard merchant ships further complicated his decision. Lower-ranked crew were expected to follow orders, not influence strategy. Suggestions from below the officer level rarely received attention, regardless of merit. This expectation shaped daily life aboard the ship and contributed to the difficulty of presenting unconventional ideas. The cook felt the weight of these norms press against his growing conviction. Breaking them risked breaching the unwritten rules that govern shipboard hierarchy. Yet the logic remained inescapable. Inaction guaranteed further losses. The convoy would continue sailing under assumptions the enemy already understood. The flaw he had observed would persist, reinforcing the dangerous predictability built into routine procedures. By contrast, acting held the possibility, however small, of disrupting the pattern. The difference between guaranteed loss and potential disruption created the narrow space in which his decision formed. The stakes extended far beyond his own position, reaching into the lives of everyone who relied on these convoys. He assessed the implications with the same methodical attention he applied to his daily duties. The decision became a turning point between remaining a passive witness and embracing responsibility unsupported by authority. Each loss weighed on his reasoning, shaping a path toward intervention. The cook recognized that he could not rely on the system to evolve quickly enough to protect those at risk. The burden of insight left him with a choice that demanded action. As the ship prepared for its next convoy run, he committed internally to carrying out his idea without seeking approval. The decision settled quietly but firmly, formed by cumulative evidence and sharpened by the urgency of preventing further loss. He accepted the uncertainty surrounding the outcome and the personal consequences that might follow. This internal commitment marked the moment he stepped beyond the expectations of his role, driven by the conviction that responsibility sometimes falls to those least empowered to act. The convoy's departure approached with routines unfolding as expected, yet one member of the crew now carried a plan that diverged from every established guideline. The cook approached his plan with deliberate precision. He used his access to routine ship functions to make a small adjustment in an area no one monitored closely. His responsibilities placed him at consistent points within the daily cycle, allowing him to alter a pattern embedded within the ship's internal operations. This pattern formed part of a sequence U-boats had learned to track, despite its seemingly minor significance. By changing it, he introduced an element capable of disrupting the enemy's interpretation of the ship's behavior. The act targeted a feature of convoy movement that officers considered too minor to influence tactical outcomes. Its predictability had gone unnoticed, but submarine crews tracking subtle cues relied on it to gauge timing and distance. The cook understood this from observing how events unfolded across previous voyages. His modification did not interfere with navigation or defense, yet it changed the consistency of a routine that indirectly revealed the ship's position at predictable intervals. The change created a discrepancy between what enemy crews expected and what they would encounter. He executed the act quietly, ensuring the adjustment blended into normal procedures without attracting attention. The effectiveness depended on timing aligned with the convoy's operational rhythm. Any deviation from this rhythm risked exposing the change or rendering it ineffective. The cook relied on his comprehension of daily schedules, the flow of duties, and the repetitive structure of ship routines. His position allowed him to move unnoticed while carrying out the alteration, ensuring that his involvement remained invisible to those who might question its purpose. Though small, the act held the potential to influence how U-boats calculated their approach. By altering the pattern, the cook introduced uncertainty where previously there had been reliability. This uncertainty could shift firing solutions, disrupt tracking attempts, or force enemy crews to reassess positions. The adjustment challenged assumptions built on extended observation, compelling submarines to operate without the advantage of anticipated behavior. Once complete, the cook returned to his duties as though nothing had changed. The crew continued preparing for the next phase of the voyage without knowledge of the intervention. Officers followed routine procedures, unaware that a foundation of convoy predictability had been quietly altered. As the convoy approached waters known for concentrated submarine activity, the ship carried an unacknowledged deviation within its operations. The convoy advanced into danger with a hidden variable on board, and only the cook understood how the approaching encounter might unfold. U-boats positioned along the convoy's projected route prepared to strike using patterns refined through previous encounters. Their commanders relied on expectations formed from observing identical sequences across multiple voyages. As the convoy advanced into the engagement zone, submarines executed coordinated maneuvers intended to isolate predictable targets, including the ship on which the cook had altered the routine. Enemy calculations assumed the same timing and internal signals that had guided earlier attacks. The cook's alteration began influencing how the ship fit into the larger formation. The minor shift disrupted an expected pattern that U-boats historically used to confirm firing windows. Submarine crews encountered inconsistencies when cross-checking their estimates, leading to adjustments made under pressure. These adjustments introduced uncertainty at a moment when precision normally determined success. The disruption created a mismatch between anticipated behavior and actual movement, challenging assumptions that had previously produced reliable outcomes. Officers aboard the merchant vessel noticed anomalies in enemy behavior. Their reports recorded unexpected gaps in attack attempts and unusual spacing between torpedo launches. They could not attribute these inconsistencies to any known tactical change because no authorized adjustments had been made. The convoy continued forward with heightened caution, recognizing that enemy intentions remained unclear. The absence of explanation intensified tension, as uncertainty carried its own form of risk. An early torpedo launched toward the formation deviated from the path that would have intercepted the cook's ship. Analysts later identified a timing error in the submarine's calculations, suggesting that a small inconsistency had altered the attack sequence. Although no final assessment could be made, the event hinted at the possibility that the cook's intervention had shifted the enemy's firing solution. Crew members registered the moment but awaited confirmation through subsequent encounters. Whether the alteration succeeded or simply postponed an attack remained unresolved. The convoy moved deeper into contested waters without clarity on the extent of the disruption. As the convoy progressed, the altered routine continued to influence how U-boats interpreted the formation. Targeting attempts based on familiar patterns yielded inconsistent results, forcing submarines to revise calculations under conditions that demanded speed and accuracy. The repeated disruption undermined firing confidence, leading to hesitations and misjudgments during critical phases of engagement. What began as a single deviation in one ship's behavior affected multiple enemy decision points across the route. Other convoy ships benefited from the resulting confusion. Submarines targeting adjacent vessels encountered similar discrepancies because their strategies relied on convoy-wide predictability. When one ship's behavior changed, it influenced the timing model used for the entire formation. The indirect protection provided to surrounding vessels became evident as fewer torpedoes aligned with expected paths. Escort units recorded anomalies that did not match previous U-boat tactics, noting irregular intervals between attacks and disorganized pursuit patterns. Word spread informally among crews about the convoy's unexpected survival during a high-risk passage. Sailors exchanged observations about disrupted attack sequences and speculated on possible explanations. The absence of a clear cause elevated curiosity and contributed to a growing belief that something unplanned had shifted the engagement's outcome. Although speculation remained unconfirmed, the sense that a small change had produced a far larger impact gained momentum among those who tracked ship movements and enemy responses. For the cook, the emerging pattern clarified how a seemingly minor act could influence operations beyond the boundaries of his own vessel. Each misaligned enemy action reinforced the potential of his adjustment, revealing the extent to which U-boat strategies depended on assumptions rather than absolute certainty. The widening scope of consequences extended beyond what he initially envisioned, shifting the balance within the convoy. Leadership soon began searching for explanations for the unexpectedly low casualty rate, increasing the risk that the unauthorized adjustment would be discovered. U-boat commanders submitted reports noting irregularities in recent convoy engagements. These documents described breakdowns in timing estimates, inconsistencies in target behavior, and firing solutions that deviated from expected patterns. Crew logs recorded confusion arising from the inability to confirm movements within the convoy using established verification methods. The discrepancies forced submarine officers to question assumptions long considered reliable. Initial assessments suggested that the convoys had adopted new strategies, prompting calls for operational re-evaluation. Enemy command attempted to recalibrate targeting procedures. Analysts reviewed past engagements to identify potential sources of error, proposing adjustments to prediction models and coordination practices. These changes temporarily reduced operational effectiveness, as submarine crews tested revised calculations under conditions that lacked their former predictability. The shift disrupted established routines, creating uncertainty within a system previously marked by confidence in its methodology. Even minor reforms produced unintended inconsistencies that challenged enemy crews during live engagements. Allied officers observed the improved survival rates with cautious optimism. Their reports attributed the shift to disciplined execution of existing protocols rather than any unrecognized intervention. The absence of documented tactical changes reinforced the belief that repeated drills and adherence to procedure were responsible for the improved results. This interpretation aligned with institutional expectations and supported the assumption that success emerged from refined compliance rather than innovation. Institutional blind spots prevented recognition of the underlying cause. The cook's adjustment remained undocumented, unacknowledged, and undetectable within official frameworks. Investigations into the improved outcomes focused on officer-level decisions, escort performance, or environmental anomalies. None explored the possibility that a low-ranking crew member had influenced the dynamic through an alteration unrelated to formal strategy. The structure of command inherently filtered out explanations that originated outside authorized channels. Attempts to analyze discrepancies met with limited success. Interviews with officers produced no evidence of deliberate changes. Convoy logs reflected routine operations, providing no indication of irregularities that could account for the shift in enemy behavior. Analysts interpreted the lack of concrete data as confirmation that improvements stemmed from enhanced precision in existing practices. Without documentation, the true source of disruption remained invisible. Irony deepened as both sides adapted strategies in response to outcomes they misunderstood. U-boats recalibrated firing models to account for unpredictability that had arisen from a single unauthorized adjustment. Allied command reinforced procedures they believed were responsible for improved results, unaware that their renewed confidence rested on an unexamined anomaly. Each institution acted on interpretations that diverged from the actual cause of the shift. Naval leadership formalized new theories about convoy performance, attributing the improvement to cohesion and refined discipline. These conclusions shaped future directives and reinforced hierarchical assumptions about where meaningful contributions originated. The possibility that a small change from an overlooked crew member had influenced the strategic landscape did not align with institutional narratives. As a result, the explanation remained outside official recognition. Meanwhile, the cook maintained silence. He carried the weight of knowing his action had altered convoy survival statistics, yet revealing it risked disciplinary consequences and potential disruption of the fragile institutional balance. His decision to remain anonymous created a private conflict between acknowledgement and the understanding that the impact of his act spoke for itself. The cook continued serving aboard merchant convoys without recognition. He maintained routine duties, ensuring each voyage adhered to operational standards, while privately observing the long-term decline in U-boat effectiveness. Reports from Naval Command showed steadily improving survival rates among convoys, though officers credited the change to enhanced structural discipline and coordination. No official record acknowledged the minor but pivotal intervention that had subtly shifted enemy calculations. The impact of the act extended across subsequent voyages. Other convoy ships experienced fewer attacks as the initial disruption introduced layers of unpredictability into enemy planning. The cumulative effect created a more resilient system, reducing losses and gradually reshaping the operational landscape. While the officers believed success stemmed entirely from training and adherence to protocol, the reality reflected the nuanced influence of a single, deliberate adjustment. The cook accepted his anonymity, prioritizing outcome over personal acclaim. He understood that history often attributes success to institutions rather than individuals, yet he valued the preservation of lives more than recognition. His quiet contribution became part of a broader legacy, a subtle alteration in procedure that transformed predictable patterns, improved convoy survivability, and demonstrated the hidden power of vigilance and initiative at every level. Over time, the initial act became part of the invisible architecture of convoy operations. Command structures remained unaware of its origin, yet its effects persisted in reducing vulnerability and shaping enemy behavior. Small decisions, often overlooked, proved capable of influencing outcomes on a scale far larger than formal authority would suggest. Even without acknowledgement, the cook's intervention left a measurable imprint. Individual insight had intervened in a rigid system, quietly altering the course of events and revealing the unseen potential embedded within every human role. The story demonstrates that meaningful innovation can emerge from those positioned at the margins of authority. Change is not always initiated by leaders or institutions. It often arises from individuals who observe repeated failures, recognize patterns, and act decisively despite structural limitations. The cook's intervention illustrates the capacity of overlooked perspectives to reveal solutions invisible to conventional hierarchies. Hierarchical rigidity carries inherent costs during crisis. When formal channels fail to integrate insights from frontline actors, preventable losses accumulate. Systems dependent on rigid procedures and assumption-based routines create blind spots that can be exploited by adversaries. The cook's actions highlight the importance of flexibility, judgment, and initiative within constrained roles, showing how small adjustments can produce outsized effects when others cannot or do not respond. Real change frequently originates with those closest to persistent problems. The cook was neither an officer nor a strategist, yet proximity to operational routines enabled him to identify a critical vulnerability. His responsibility-driven choice, despite the absence of authority, underscores the principle that moral and practical responsibility sometimes requires action beyond formal mandates. The broader lesson extends beyond military history. Systems improve when unconventional thinking is allowed to influence outcomes. Hierarchies must be receptive to insight from unexpected sources to prevent stagnation and adapt to emerging threats. Moral responsibility often demands courage, judgment, and intervention at the point of risk, where the consequences of inaction are evident. This narrative leaves the viewer with a reflective challenge. Consider the unnoticed insights within their own environment and the potential impact of small actions on outcomes that seem determined by larger structures. Countless uncredited contributors shaped the course of wartime operations, acting without expectation of recognition. Their decisions, often minor on the surface, produced ripple effects that saved lives and influenced larger systems. The Cook story is one example of the dignity inherent in such acts, demonstrating that small interventions can yield meaningful change. Reflecting on these lessons encourages awareness of the power within overlooked roles and fosters respect for those who act responsibly despite limitations. This is Battlefront Insider, where we reveal the human stories behind every war.